What's going on? All thanks for tuning in once again. Let's talk Wardley versus Parker. You know, funny enough, the lines have gone up plus 525. Is Wardley injured? You know, I don't understand these lines. You know, Parker, don't get me wrong. You know, Parker has a better resume. He's had a title before. He's fought, top opposition. You know, he's got Ruiz, Yuri Fury, Bacoli, Wilder, Zhang. You know, better resume. Joe Joyce, Anthony Joshua, names that everyone knows. You know, everybody knows these guys. Fabio Wardley hasn't really been fighting top guys, but, he has shown that he's got a great right hand. You know, he's got big power in both hands, especially with the right. You know, he's a very dangerous puncher. I wouldn't say he's a great boxer, but he's a dangerous puncher where, in the heavyweight division, that's all it takes. All it takes is one shot, and that's what Wardley brings to the table. And Joseph Parker, although he's been with all these guys, most of these guys have dropped him. Guys that are punchers, like you look at Dillian White, a guy that has a big left hook, or a big hook, you could say. What happened? He drops Parker with the hook. Joe Joyce drops Parker with the hook. Shile Zhang drops Parker with the hook and a straight, So most of these punchers have dropped Joseph Parker. Deontay Wilder didn't really throw much when he fought Parker. But guys that go after him and know that they have the ability to put him down, tend to drop him. So that's what I'm expecting with Wardley. I'm expecting him to drop Joseph Parker. And what does he bring? He brings a right hook, doesn't he? It's a right hand. It's coming with a curve. It's a punch that can be thrown around the guard. All it takes is one big punch. And Wardley understands that Parker's gotten up, in the past. Although Wardley doesn't really have a resume like Parker, he's got names in his sparring, that he's sparred against. He's sparred against Usyk. He's sparred against Joshua, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. So he's sparred against guys that can move and box their way around, So Wardley understands, that he's not going to go back to the drawing board and throw flurries, do a Ali shuffle, start jabbing away, inviting guys in, turning shots on the rope like Canelo. He's not going to do things like that. His whole game is to put you out, with the right hand. Goes the distance with Frazier Clark, and then in the rematch gets rid of him very early. Breaks his face. Devastating power, and it's power that he can carry. People are critiquing him about fighting Justice Hooney, saying that, Justice Hooney was schooling him and, putting it on him, and, he was having his way, and, he had no chance. It was a fluke punch. If anything, Wardley showed that he can carry that punch in the later rounds. That was one punch. Justice Hooney still had his legs under him. Justice Hooney wasn't really sitting down in the corner. He was getting up straight away before the bell rang. He was fresher than Wardley in that fight. And Wardley still pulls it out of the bag. So he knows how to pull it off. He knows how to win. And he's got youth. He's a young guy going after Parker. Sure, he's terrible on the back foot. He's not a good back-footed fighter, but he's got the ability to push you around. He's got the ability to roughen you up, inside the pocket if he has to. That's what he done against Adelaide. So Joseph Parker, he's a guy that likes space. He's a guy that likes to hang around in the pocket, which is very dangerous against Wardley. See, what Hooney done was he was deep inside the pocket. He was underneath Wardley, so he could throw to the body. Didn't really give Wardley enough time to throw or space that he needed. Wardley was always backed up. Parker's a different fighter than that. If Parker does do that and manages to back him up, gets him on the ropes, there's a chance that he can put him up. But that's not the game that I've seen from Parker. Watching his last fights, even the last one, that early knockout against Bacoli, that punch was thrown from distance. That wasn't a punch that was a short punch. So I still see this as a close fight. Plus 525 with the lines going up. I just think it's one of those things that you can't ignore. Although we're expecting Joseph Parker to beat Wardley, by points, we know that he's a better boxer. Well, most do anyway. He's a more experienced, boxer than Wardley. Managed to beat some guys, just beat some guys that can box, so although he's a better boxer than Wardley has the bigger punch, and he's got the ability to knock you out with one punch, which not many heavyweights have that. Sure, heavyweights can drop you, but Wardley can put you out with one punch. His knockout ratio speaks for itself. You don't go the distance with someone and then in the rematch you knock them out in the first round. That just shows that right hand really does have some devastating power on it. Like I mentioned, round 10, Justice Hooney fresh, Wardley still delivers. No fluke. That was just his signature punch. Some guys, they have a signature punch and they can pull it off. Look at Deontay Wilder, he pulled it off, 39 knockouts or something like that, I know he didn't really fight, Usyk or Joshua, but, most guys he put out. Tyson Fury knocked him out knocked him down 4 times, I should say, in 3 fights. So guys that have signature punches, they just know how to pull it off, they know how to deliver, they know that that's their ticket to get out of the fight. As Teddy Atlas would say, the equalizer, that raises all the wrongs. And, you're only as good as your last fight. And although Fabio Wardley, you could say he looked terrible, in my opinion, it shows that he can still deliver late in the fight. Even though he was getting beaten up from Hooney, I'm not going to disguise it. He was getting beaten up, he was struggling, he still managed to find a way. And I think that he will find a way against Joseph Parker. If Joseph Parker allows him to have the space, or if Wardley, does what he done against Adelaide and, shrugs him around, pushes him around, roughens him up, manages to get on his front foot, Parker's in trouble. So, plus 525 is a complete joke, in my opinion. Fabio Wardley's undefeated. His knockout ratio speaks for itself. And I'm not going to hesitate with this one. So, I'm still going with my initial thoughts. I think Parker can win on points, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Wardley pulls it off and manages to land that signature right hook, signature right hand, you could say, and knocks out Parker cold. That's my opinion. Leave yours, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.